morning, intuitives. Wanted to get a video before work because, like I said, I'm going to try to get a video out every other day. Why every other day, not every day? Because I work out every other day and I don't have time to do both with my work schedule. And working out helps relieve stress, and it's good for my mental health. My psychiatrist even agreed with that. So there you go. That's kind of why it's every other day, except when life and lawsuits and things like that happen, which happens to all of us, not necessarily lawsuits. And I hope you don't ever have to go through that, because suing a rich and powerful county government is not fun. So anyway, I wanted to get another witchcraft video out there. And again, I'm going to make the point one more time that my witchcraft videos are primarily geared towards non-witches that are curious about witchcraft, or seekers who are interested in witchcraft and are just starting to learn about it. Because, while I am a witch and I do have I guess I am a hereditary witch on my mother's side, technically, I'm by no means an expert, and I'm still learning, and most witches continue to learn through the rest of their time. I am also, a solitary pagan witch and not in an initiated group, nor do I want to be. So, now that my little intros, and again, like always, everything's my opinion. So, now that I'm through that, I want to talk about the difference between Wicca and witchcraft, because a lot of people who know nothing about either assume they are both one and the same, that Wicca is witchcraft, and it's not. And again, we're oversimplifying here, and I want to add too that I got, just because I'm not a Wiccan, I don't have anything against Wiccans. I'm just trying to explain to people who don't understand that there is indeed a difference. Saying like all witches are Wiccans would be like saying all Christians are Protestants, and that's, or all Jews are of the Reform movement, and none of that's true. Most people know at least one of those references will be familiar to you. So, what exactly is Wicca? Well, Wicca, simplified, is basically, it is a neo-pagan, nature-based goddess religion that began mid-last century in the 50s by a man called Gerald Gardner, and that began the neo-pagan movement that continues into this day. It really hit its stride in the mid-50s when some of the last witchcraft laws against witchcraft were repealed. I think the UK had anti-witchcraft laws until like 1952 or something ridiculously not long ago, which is weird because they're usually more progressive than we are over here. That whole referendum thing and national health care. Like, direct democracy bad, oligarchy good. I'm Bill Clinton, I love interns. So, that kind of thing. We love corporatism. So do they, because Tony Blair was like, I want to be Bill Clinton, he's so cool. But I digress from that. So, back to my point. The neo-pagan movement, which Wicca was in the front of, began in mid-last century, and that's where Wicca took place. Now, it's a little difficult with explaining Wicca, because it's like, did Gerald Gardner create it? Yes and no. So, did he create it whole cloth out of nothing? No. Gardner was a part of some sort of witchcraft group called the New Forest Coven over in the UK in the 40s. We don't really know much about it. To my knowledge, the grimoire, or the Book of Shadows from that group, has never been found. We know there was a woman named Dorothy Clutterbuck who was, where Gardner's initiation took place was in her home. She was somebody prominent in the New Forest Coven. We know she existed. We don't really know much more about it. So Gardner had some exposure to witchcraft prior to starting Wicca. How much is honestly debatable, and I don't think anybody, to my knowledge, really knows. So he got into witchcraft later in life. He was an amateur anthropologist. I think he tried to be a filmmaker. He spent time as a nudist. And you'll see this reflected in Wicca too. A lot of Wicca, there's obviously reconstructional aspects of European paganism, but there's also expressions of who Gardner was as a person, like the Kris and other Malayan weapons was the book that Gardner first published when he was an amateur anthropologist. And one of the main things in Wicca is the ritual knife known as the Athame, and I find, an interesting connection between the two. That and some of the other things I'd mentioned, it's like, is that historical or is that you expressing you? So, and Wicca really, the most well-known, maybe not the most common present day, but the most well-known would be the initiatory-based types, I guess, which would be Gardnerian and Alexandrian witchcraft, or Wicca, I'm sorry. So all of Wicca, while there's parts that are from covens that were secretly existing prior to the 50s. Some is Gardner's own personal expressions, and some is borrowed from other occult societies. Like the initiatory-based lodge format pretty much resembles Freemasonry. There's some Aleister Crowley in there, some OTO, Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and that all together, like I said, along with Gardner and others' influence, formed a valid working system, a valid religion, a valid new pagan religion that, while not in itself is witchcraft, does incorporate witchcraft into its practice. Witchcraft is a part of the Wiccan religion. Wicca in itself is not witchcraft. Really hard to explain, especially without the use too much jargon. But, one can technically be a Wiccan and not practice witchcraft. It's very rare. Most Wiccans are witches, but not all witches are Wiccans, because witchcraft is sort of a nebulous term. I mean, one can practice witchcraft, the nameless art, the deed with no name, etc. It is a practice. It in itself is not a religion. It usually leads to a religion, most commonly a pagan religion of some sort, but not necessarily. One can practice witchcraft without incorporating any deities, pagan or otherwise. It can be, animalistic based, it could be ancestral based, it, could be like spirits of the land based. You technically don't have to have a religion, as I said, pagan or otherwise, to be a practicing witch. Witchcraft is a practice, spell casting and divination and necromancy, things of that sort. I got into that in another video, but it is those practices that makes you a witch, not a specific belief system or religion, and that's not to say there's not aspects of Wicca that I do like, despite the fact that I guess I fall under the umbrella of traditional witchcraft, and I'll get into that first. So, the two biggest groups of modern witchcraft would be the Wiccan groups, which, again, there's many under that. There's Gardnerian, there's Alexandrian, there's Eclectic, there's, Dianic, there's Solitary, which has its own subgroups, but, just for example. And then there's traditional witchcraft, which is, in essence, it's witchcraft that is not Wiccan. And the most common of these would be like the Trail of Tubal-Cain, which Shawnee Oates is now the head of, but it was started by Robert Cochrane, who was really against Gardner and wrote some interesting letters to Gardner, which are worth reading. It's a hard to find actual hard copy book, but you can find the PDF online. Pretty easy, the letters of Robert Cochrane. Ironically, Cochrane himself never wrote a book, but I digress from that. So traditional witchcraft is more of trying the best we can with the information we have to reconstruct the practice of witchcraft as it existed hundreds of years ago. It's kind of tough because a lot of it was oral tradition, and you have to in some respects, modernize things in the same way where, like, you're not gonna use a recipe to make some food from 400 years ago today. It probably wouldn't taste good. You got to make its minor tweaks to, you know what I'm trying to get at. So you do that. So there's a lot under, the traditional witchcraft thing. There's, the Striganaria, the Italians. As I said, there's traditional British witchcraft, which is different from traditional British Wicca, which is Alexandrian and Gardnerian. And, there's some interesting stuff in there too. Read Traditional Wicca by Thorn Mooney. She's a traditional Wiccan who has a pretty cool YouTube channel. As I said, I'm not a Wiccan, but I enjoy a lot of her content. And then on the traditional witchcraft side, there's Gemma Gary, there's Chris and Tara Orapello, the authors, of course, and people of that nature, Peter Padden. I'm not gonna say Raven Grimassi because he's kind of wicked, kind of not. He's in his own little group with his Stragaria, which is kind of Italian seasoned Wicca. As one of my mentors, Dr. Gian Michael Servato, will explain. Check out his channel; it's in my subscriptions. But aside from all my little sidebars and giving you authors which you should go read, one side or the other or both, if you're interested in witchcraft of any kind, there is a difference between, Wiccans and witches. And as I said, and I'll say it again, most Wiccans are witches, but there are witches who are not Wiccans. And unfortunately, there is a lot of infighting among us, too, which we have to stop because witches in general, witches, pagans, all of us together are still less than 1%, and we really shouldn't be fighting amongst ourselves. And there's this thing in witchcraft, unfortunately. There's a lot of valid working systems out there, but there seems to be this sense of, pride and egotism within witchcraft for some groups to be like, I have the true craft, and everything else is, just some watered down thing. I have the real witchcraft, and nothing else is real. And that, witchcraft existed in most cultures throughout time. So there's very, very many ways to invoke witchcraft and or magic of some kind that is a valid working system. As I spoke in other videos, most people are drawn towards things from their own heritage. Kind of makes sense. You may or may not have blood ties to that specific type of craft, but like most religions and or philosophies, practices, there are, many different valid paths, and it's the same in witchcraft. One does not have to be a Wiccan to be a witch. One can be a Wiccan without being a witch too. Like I said, that's rare, but it does happen. So, if you're looking into getting into witchcraft, understand that there's many different paths. The two main umbrellas are Wicca and what's now known as traditional witchcraft. And again, we have to stop the infighting amongst us, but, read some books, look at some YouTube videos. You can ask me for some book recommendations. A lot of them are on Audible because I love my audiobooks. So that's good. I really like that there's traditional witchcraft books available on audiobooks now. But just keep in mind, if you are looking to, choose your own path in the craft, look at many different avenues. Don't just go down the path of the, first type of witchcraft that you encounter and assume that it must be the right one. Explore some different ones, see what makes sense to you. You can take things from different paths. Each witch's craft is their own, but primarily speaking, you're going to find a certain path where your craft is going to most closely resemble. And before you do that, check out your different options, see what you connect with, see what makes sense to you, see what you are called to do. It's a little difficult because it can be hard to find mentors, and it's sad. Usually, becoming a witch and going down that path as a path one usually must walk alone, at least most of the time. People will help you from here to here along the way, but you really have to learn and explore for yourself. So understand there's a difference between witchcraft and Wicca, and there is a lot of different paths if one chooses to walk the path of the witch.